look at now some of the signs and symptoms of VT. And Pullman identified that there were general changes and specific changes that are indicative. We're going to start with the general changes, and that being no time or energy for yourself or others. And I'm just wondering, how many people here have cancelled either a family or social event solely due to feeling just exhausted or stressed by your work? I know I have. Probably too many times. Now, feeling like this on occasion is normal, and it can happen, with any job that you do, particularly if you've got major projects on the go. But if it's something that becomes a regular occurrence, then maybe there is something more serious going on, and it's a flag to recognise that maybe you're experiencing VT. Increased feelings of cynicism, sadness and seriousness. And I think that this is a particularly dangerous one because it can affect your attitude to your work, to your colleagues, your family and friends and the world in general. Now, I've been working in trauma now for 24 years and I recall early in the 90s going through an intense period of feeling that so many other things that people do out there for either jobs or just in their daily lives just felt sort of like trivial and petty, and I would feel very angry and irritated. The majority of the world out there didn't appear to know and didn't want to know what was happening, what people were experiencing. And that I was just hearing these, terrible stories on a daily basis, and everyone else seemed to sort of like be walking out there completely oblivious to it. And then I discovered horse riding, and I went through a second adolescence, and now onto my third adolescence. But I totally fell in love with horses and riding. And it was during one of my riding lessons that I had an epiphany, and I became aware that my riding instructor's job was as important to me and as meaningful to me as my role as a therapist was to my clients. And that was a really profound moment of beginning to sort of like recognise that I had been experiencing VT for quite some time. I hadn't been recognising it, and it was seriously getting in the way of my life. And so that from that moment, it really helped me sort of like be far more aware and and on the ball with it, and recognise things that I needed to do to sort of like change my life and make it more balanced. And so now, whilst I obviously do go through periods of cynicism and anger and sadness as a result of my work, I'm far more able to process that and recognise it, when it's happening, do something about it. And I'm sure that a lot of you here will be able to recognise yourself in that story too. And then there can be also an increased sensitivity to violence, to news stories or to movies. Now, we're constantly bombarded with images and horrors of things going around the world. That's what makes news, it's what makes headlines. Graphic violence. And it's common for people for people who are working with trauma to become very sensitised to violence and find that they can't watch the same kind of movies that they used to, they can't watch the news, switching it off, those kinds of things. And again, this can be a reaction that anyone can feel, not necessarily if you're working with trauma from time to time, but again, if it becomes part of your general way of being, of needing to avoid that kind of material, it's letting you know that there is something that needs attention. It can be an indicator of VT. And similarly, an opposite reaction can also be just as much of a warning sign too. When you become desensitised to violence and find yourself that you're really not sort of like reacting in a way that you think would be a normal reaction to seeing or hearing something horrific. So being numbed to the impact of it. And again, you know, from my own experience, and I'm going to go back to the bushfires as an example, is that my practice is predominantly working with adults with a history of child abuse. And some of these clients were also living in bushfire affected areas or had friends or family members in bushfire affected areas. And I had other clients who had no personal connection to the fires whatsoever, but all of them were reactivated. And I don't know whether you noticed that with any of your clients during that time, but their trauma symptoms really flared up when those fires were going on. There was heightened anxiety, sleep disturbance, fear for their safety, grief and loss, an increase in depression. And interestingly, those clients, most of them, did not make the connection of the bushfires with a reactivation of their symptoms, which I thought was very interesting. So this was a mass trauma that was happening in Australia, impacting my clients either directly or indirectly. Now at that same time, I also had friends living in bushfire affected zones. My home wasn't in an affected zone, but it was in a high risk area. And the news was constantly, it was, as you remember, it's 24/7 just images of those terrible fires, body counts, people being traumatised. It was a disaster on a massive scale. And in the end, I had to stop watching the news. I was just avoided it, and I was really aware that that's what I was doing. And other therapists that I spoke to around that time too said that they had, found themselves doing the same thing as well. It was a self-protective measure, and I knew it was a self-protective measure, and I needed to do it. But then the flip side of that is feeling guilty about switching off the news. It's like, okay, I can press a button and not watch this anymore. People who are going through that can't do that. And so even when you're trying to protect yourself, there can also be, ramifications for those self-protective measures. Okay, so that was the general changes that can be indications of VT. Let's look now at some more specific changes. So disrupted worldview and spirituality or meaning. And so these are disruptions around our understanding of what the world is about, how the world works and your role and place in the world. So issues related to the thoughts and opinions of others, life principles, questions of morality. The relationship between causality and meaning. Why do things happen? What is the meaning or purpose of events and experiences? And this is something that our clients is a big issue for our clients around why did this happen, what does it mean, trying to make sense of their experience. And it's also something that can really impact us and bring up those same questions for us. A sense of meaning, hope and a connection with something beyond the self, whether you believe in God or whatever your personal, spiritual, philosophical belief system may be. So it's about questioning around all aspects of life beyond the material or physical realm. And whilst we do hear a lot about, many anecdotes of people who have the experience of that, drawing on their belief systems may be something that has really sustained them through critical and traumatic times. I hear just as many stories from my clients and also with therapists that I'm doing case consults with that it had been the cause of a crisis of meaning and a sense of purpose or a crisis in their faith. So it can work either way. Secondly, Perlman describes disrupted identity, self-capacity and ego resources. So people that you previously felt able to relate to and communicate with, such as colleagues, partner, family, friends, you now feel don't understand you or don't understand your work or who you are. And there can be, also questioning of yourself, difficulty relating to or connecting with yourself. Who am I? It's like, in some way, the stories that you hear just cause you to sort of like question everything about yourself and the people around you and why things happen and what they mean.